I just want to come back to a point that was made about whose fault is it? Does it matter whose fault it is, why we're in this position? I think it does make a lot of difference. One, I've been going around doing our meetings in our union saying it's not your fault, you've done nothing wrong, you've carried on doing your job, and the reason why we've got a financial crisis is nothing to do with you. But I think it's important in terms of how management approaches the issue, because if management believes it is the fault of the employees, then that will dictate the way in which they go about trying to solve the problem. And I don't think, however more efficient staff become, that it's going to solve this level of financial cuts that are being imposed on the civil service or on the public sector at the moment. And it's almost like, is there in this mind, and I know it is in a lot of senior managers who I come into contact with, is that they think there is this lazy, indolent worker in cahoots with the trade unions, wandering around their organisations, stopping them doing their proper jobs. And that is not the reality. But if management tackle it that way, then that will be the truth of the response that they get. If they say there is this external problem in terms of funding, which we have to tackle and deal with, how are we going to do it? They have to then address the concerns of staff. And the concern of staff I know we're getting is twofold. One is, am I going to have a job or not? And if the management aren't prepared to tackle that issue, and I don't think it's honest to say, look, really, we're going to have to get rid of you. It hurts me more than it really going to hurt you, but you're going to have to be made redundant. The honesty is to say, we're going to try and do this without making you redundant. Let's try and avoid that problem. And the second concern is around pay. Can I survive on the pay that I'm being given? And if you like some being lectured by people who earn a lot about how much you need to take your belt in order to survive is not a good way to win hearts and minds of people. And if you're looking at performance pay, if you're looking at bonuses, if you're looking at the ways that things, that is not going to encourage people who are on 21,000 or less, wherever you put it, to say, I have to put up with a pay freeze. And that is a genuine concern that people have. So I think in terms of getting engagement, there's no point unless you recognise, management recognises the concerns and tries to deal with them. And I think this point about Bedfordshire Police and so on, I think fairness is a key issue. People can put up with a lot if they see it's everyone is taking the same cut. But if it's just them dealing with it and others aren't having to take the same pain, then I think people react differently. And I think that's the problem at the moment, is both the disparity in the cuts and also the disparity in the treatment. I think it's going to get a confrontation rather than a co-determination approach if people aren't very careful.
John, do you want to deal particularly with the point I think the colleague from Ipsos Mori made about not being paralysed by fear, and also this point about the demotivating factor within the sort of target-driven organisational culture, and also this point I think about terminology, because I think it's a point very well made. And do you have any reflections on that from what you've been doing in Samwell?
On the terminology?
Yeah, that bit in particular, well, on any of it, but in particular the terminology point, which I think, as I say, is a very interesting one.
I wasn't planning to talk about any of those. I was going to pick up on health and well-being and management culture, actually, but hey-ho, I can try all five,
do them all, Danny, do them all.
OK, because people asked about those as well. Perhaps we'll start with those and then come back to the ones you just highlighted, because colleagues have talked quite a bit about those. On the health and well-being side of things, it's very interesting, and then this picks up on what Anthony was saying as well. Ironically, the NHS is one of the worst organisations for looking after the health and well-being of its own staff. Whether that's something to do with always being sort of preoccupied with the health of patients or the ill health of patients and forgetting about ourselves, as it were, I don't know. But we are notoriously bad about it. One of our, also interestingly, occupational health physicians recently had an article published about, and I can say this because he had it published, he's quite happy for being in the public domain. He contemplated suicide because he was so stressed, and he couldn't work out who to turn to. And this seems to be a particular problem for the medical profession, as it happens. There's been the Borman report recently, which many people will be familiar with, which was very much trying to address this agenda and link it very much into the staff engagement side of things, because we all know about the sort of, this is Anthony's point again, I think, if I understood him correctly, the really debilitating effect of not being in control of what you're doing. So they're all very linked together. So I think we are starting to make progress, but in the NHS, our track record on that sort of thing is very poor. So we do need to focus on that. On the management culture and leadership issues, I would absolutely reinforce the sort of implications of the question's point there, which when we embarked on Listening into Action, we really underestimated the effect of different styles of leadership on the ground. What I mean by that is we set off on a whole load of projects across the organisation, and they gradually sort of dispersed and sort of rolled out across the whole place, which is, of course, a large place, so you can have lots of cultures within the overall culture. And what we found was that in some areas they were sort of foundering a bit after a while. We'd get this good, because it's very high energy at the beginning, and that all went fine. And then after a few months, it would start sort of dissipating, and we'd be thinking, well, why is that? Why is that a problem? Why is it working so brilliantly in a lot of places and not in there? And no word of a lie, in every case, it has come down to, if you take individual wards or individual departments in our hospitals, down to basically the style of leadership on the ground in that area. We've done recently work on sickness absence management. That's been talked about quite a bit today. I'm exaggerating for effect there, but I think I could demonstrate a more or less complete correlation between sickness rates in a ward or department and leadership style. We have an overall sickness rate of about 3.8% at the moment, which is, by NHS standards, is quite respectable, quite a bit below the average, but that disguises rates that go from more or less nothing to 10, 15%. And when we've done a lot of quizzing of divisional management, which is all the middle management, senior middle management lately, when we have our review meetings with them, we say, why have you got such a high level of sickness on ward X? And the answer never has anything to do with people being ill. It has to do with a team being disrupted, or a problem with the leader in that area, or anything, some sort of event that has destabilised things, but everything apart from actual illness, sickness, which just tells you everything, doesn't it? It's about how we can improve these things and what are appropriate ways of going about this and what aren't. Incidentally, just a quick aside, through the Listening into Action progress, we have found the people most concerned about reducing sickness absence are frontline staff. Absolutely consistently, because in some cases they feel that people are off sick when they shouldn't be, basically, and they want something done about it because it puts more pressure on them. So there's it's a very complicated area, but it certainly needs. But I'm drifting slightly off the point there to sort of bang on about sickness, but essentially leadership style at the first line and sort of middle management level is absolutely crucial to and having the right leadership to effective engagement. If you don't tackle that at the same time, and as I say, hand on heart, we didn't tackle that enough to start off with. We've more recently, slightly late in the day, done a lot more on that with some effect. So in terms of the things you highlighted, Nita, targets, well, the government claim that they're reducing the number of targets we're working to. You might have seen changes in the 4-hour target, 18-week targets and things like that. Brackets, not quite all that it seems, but dare I say, but they are a problem. I mean, the questioner said, this problem of having to, people being judged on target performance and nobody worrying about their management style, that certainly has been a problem. I think we're possibly getting a bit more sophisticated, but I would agree with the general sentiment. Terminology, yeah. I mean, I made the point earlier on about, watch out for management speak. I mean, I try to speak in a fairly sort of straightforward style without too much of the management words and the acronyms and that sort of stuff. But it's very easy to slip into them, particularly talking to people who don't work in the same sector that you that you do. Demotivation. What were you asking about demotivation? I've written down demotivation here, but I can't remember exactly what the angle was. No,
well, I think this was a point about, not being paralysed by fear.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Well, you can't be, can you? I mean, we're all paid to run the services that we do, whatever the circumstances. I think he was trying to pick a fight with me just before. I might have misinterpreted him. I do sort of agree with much of what you said, but I don't think it's a question. I certainly wasn't coming at it from the point of view of. That you somehow come at it. This is the staff on the ground's fault. All I was absolutely not, because it isn't. What I was trying to say was, I think you have to be real about what the consequences are. That's all.
Okay. Are there any more contributions from the floor? Right. There's a gentleman there, and a gentleman there, and I'll take one more from the floor. Right. So, there's a lady over there. Right. So the gentleman there, and the lady there. And then I've got a couple of questions that have been given in